Meriwether and Willam, or Lewis and Clark. President Jefferson asked Meriwether Lewis to be his secretary. That didn't make much sense. Lewis was a terrible speller. Clearly, Jefferson had another reason for having Lewis around. He wanted to train him for an exploring mission. Thomas Jefferson was filled with curiosity about the West. He wanted to know about its land and its plants and animals. He wanted to know about the Indians who lived there. Were you ever curious about space and distant galaxies? The West was as unknown and in 1803 as much of outer space is now. Meriwether Lewis was born in Virginia's wooded Piedmont. He became a captain in the Virginia militia. As a soldier, he learned the ways of the Indians and how to survive in the wilderness. Lewis was a dreamer and a thinker and, like Thomas Jefferson, a careful observer who loved the land and its birds and its animals. Today, just as we train astronauts for voyages into the unexplored world, so too did President Jefferson see that Meriwether Lewis was trained in the scientific methods of the day. Lewis learned to gather seeds and identify bones. Benjamin Rush, one of the most famous scientists in America, taught him how to preserve bird and animal specimens. Lewis's mother had medical skills. From her, he learned to take care of himself and others. William Clark was to be his partner in command. Together, they prepared a very difficult expedition. They chose men who were used to living in the wild. They trained them until they were tough and disciplined. When a man fell asleep on guard duty, he was whipped. You can be sure he wouldn't fall asleep again. Some people say it was the best organized exploration of all time. I'm not going to go that far, but it was pretty terrific. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark knew what they were about. They explored that big unknown land that the United States had just bought from France, the territory of Louisiana, and they even crossed the Oregon country. They went all the way from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean and back. It was dangerous country with unexpectedly high mountains, difficult deserts, fierce animals, and wary Indians. They had prepared for danger, but they weren't quite prepared for the beauty, for the colors of wildflowers, the brilliance of sunsets on snowy mountain peaks, and the sweet smell of prairie grass. If only we could have been with them. They saw a world that would be gone soon forever. They saw birds and animals no white or black men had seen before. They saw woolly mountain goats and bighorn sheep and bright-plumed western woodpeckers. They dug up the bones of a 45-foot dinosaur. Wherever they went, they took careful notes, made maps, wrote down vocabulary lists of Indian words, and collected samples of strange plants and animals. They added 200 species to the world's list of known plants. The Native Americans taught them to use some of those plants as medicines, some as foods. If you ever need a partner for adventure, try to find someone with abilities different from your own, someone not like you, but whom you respect and enjoy. That was what made Lewis and Clark such a great team. They were not alike. Their abilities complemented each other. Meriwether Lewis was a quiet, shy man. He liked being in the wilderness, away from civilization. He liked science, and he was a fine thinker, but sometimes he was moody. William Clark was a happy, good-natured, talkative person. He was a redhead, and the younger brother of George Rogers Clark, the Revolutionary War hero who has been called the Washington of the West. William Clark, too, loved nature and the outdoors, but he also liked to be around people. Clark knew how to draw maps, and the actual maps he drew on that journey are now at Yale University. Like Lewis, he had been a soldier and was a Virginian. Clark was 34 that spring of 1804 when they headed out into the unknown West. Lewis was 4 years younger. Here is part of the instructions Jefferson sent to Meriwether Lewis. The object of your mission is to explore the Missouri River and communicate with the water of the Pacific Ocean. Beginning at the mouth of the Missouri, you will take observations of latitude and longitude at all remarkable points on the river. Your observations are to be kept with great pains and accuracy, to be entered distinctly and intelligibly for others as well as yourself to comprehend. These, as well as your other notes, should be made at your leisure times, and put into the care of the most trustworthy of your attendants. Copies should be written on the paper of the birch tree, as less reliable to injury from the damp than common paper. Other objects worthy of notice will be the soil and face of the country, its growth and vegetable productions, the animals of the country generally, and especially those not known in the U.S., the remains and accounts of any which may be deemed rare or extinct, the mineral productions of every kind, volcanic appearances, climate as characterized by the thermometer, by the proportion of rainy and cloudy and clear days, by hail, lightning, snow, ice, by the axis and recess of frost, by the winds prevailing at different seasons, the dates of which particular plants put forth or lose their flowers or leaf, times and appearance of particular birds, reptiles, and insects. President Jefferson wanted to know all about the Native Americans who inhabited the land. He wanted Lewis and Clark to establish friendships with the Indians and prepare for trade with them. Treasury Secretary Albert Gallatin asked that they find out whether that country is susceptible of a large population, which is an old-fashioned way of asking, can lots of people live in the West? Lewis and Clark went up the Missouri River on a 55-foot flatboat and 2 narrow canoes. The boat held 21 bales of gifts for the Indians, beads, ribbons, mirrors, cooking pots, and tools, as well as food and supplies for the expedition. They moved slowly, mapping, exploring, and hunting as they went. They wrote about their many adventures in the daily journals they kept for the president. You can find copies of the journals of Lewis and Clark in most libraries. They expected to be able to get all the way to the west coast by boat, with perhaps a short voyage when they reached the mountains. They knew that the source of the Missouri River would be found in mountain streams, so they were prepared to climb mountains. On the other side of the mountains, they thought that they would find new rivers leading to the Pacific. Well, they were right, sort of. They found mountains, but not the kind of mountains they expected. They were used to the time-worn Appalachians. They weren't prepared for the awesome, towering Rocky Mountains. They called them the Stone Mountains. And the rivers going west weren't where they thought they were going to find them. They had to cross deserts to get to them. That isn't all. They were surprised by rattlesnakes, bears, and mountain lions. But there were unexpected pleasures, too. They feasted on beaver tails, buffalo humps, and deer and elk steaks. They were stunned by the endless herds of buffalo. They captured 4 black and white magpies and put them in cages and sent them back down the river with the other bird, animal, and plant specimens for President Jefferson. Meriwether Lewis thought that the caged birds were beautiful. The Indians told them about grizzly bears. The bears were more dangerous than an armed warrior, they said. When an Indian wore a necklace of bear claws, it was a sign of great bravery. Lewis and Clark didn't quite believe the natives. They weren't scared. They had confidence in their guns. So when they discovered bear tracks 11 inches long, they were anxious to meet some of these bears. It happened. Lewis and a companion spotted 2 grizzlies. They both fired their rifles, hit their targets, and discovered that a single bullet would rarely kill a grizzly. One bear fled, but the other charged. Lewis and his friend ran for their lives. They were lucky to survive. Their muzzle-loading guns could not be fired again without reloading. The bear, which turned out to only be a cub, was finally killed, but it took several more shots. After that, they boiled the bear's fat and turned it into oil. Bear oil was a delicacy in the West. People liked it better than lard or even better than butter. A man named York was an important member of the Lewis and Clark team. York was Clark's black slave. He was taller than 6 feet. He was an excellent swimmer, hunter, and trapper. The Indians were awed by York. Most had never seen a black man before. Indian warriors often painted their bodies with charcoal. That was a mark of success in battle. So when they saw strong, charcoal-skinned York, they thought him the mightiest of men. York trekked, hunted, and risked his life for the expedition. When they returned home, York asked for his freedom, and Clark would not grant it. Even with all their training, Lewis and Clark might not have been successful. At least, They might not have gotten to the west coast if it hadn't been for a woman, an Indian woman named Sacagawea. When they met her, they built up a camp and settled down for the winter in present-day North Dakota. Sacagawea was 16 and married to a Frenchman. She was about to have a baby, and everyone was excited about that. When the baby was born, she named him Jean-Baptiste for his father, but called him Pompey. In the spring, when Lewis and Clark were ready to start out again, they hired Sacagawea's husband as a translator of Indian languages. Sacagawea came along with her baby strapped to her back. Years later, Pompey became a well-known Western guide. But it was Sacagawea who turned out to be the helpful one. Her no-good husband was lazy. After following the Missouri River to its source, Lewis and Clark finally realized that there was no way to cross the continent by water. By now it was late summer. They had to get out of the mountains before winter, otherwise they might freeze or starve, and that would be the end of President Jefferson's exploration team. They needed horses in order to continue. Would the Indians sell them horses? Things didn't look good. Then some Shoshones came to their camp. As soon as Sacagawea saw the Shoshone leader, she burst into tears. It was her brother, Kamehameha. When she was a child, Sacagawea had been kidnapped from this very tribe. The white men had brought her from her home. Kamehameha was so happy that he hugged Meriwether Lewis. "We were all caressed and besmeared with their grease and paint," wrote poor speller Lewis. Lewis and Clark got their horses.